Today we are going to graph a paraboloid. The function is z equals negative x squared minus y squared plus 4. And we're going to graph on the interval from z equals 0 to 4. This is a paraboloid, so if you remember from our very first tutorial, I did a parabola, and so that was a two-dimensional version of this graph. So just like any other graph, with our steps, we're going to construct the graph, we're going to find some intercepts, and then we're going to label our axes with a scale, and then we're going to find some coordinates to graph on the shape, and then we're going to draw the paraboloid. We know that with the 2D parabola, it looks like kind of that U shape. And the U shape, in this case, is going to be downward, right? We're going to turn that U upside down since X and Y here are both negative. This is similar to having like a -1 for a slope on the parabola. And since this is a three-dimensional graph, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take our two-dimensional parabola and we're going to spin it around the z-axis. And so you can think about z as like the y characteristic in the two-dimensional parabola, and then we're going to take our two-dimensional base and we're going to spin it in a circle. So it kind of looks like a thumb if you look at that shape I just drew there, which I thought was kind of funny. So this thumb-like shape is what I've done here for the tactile graph. I have started with this scale, and for the base, instead of starting a new base, I basically just took the unit circle graph with the circular grid pattern, and I put it as my base. So the unit circle has a radius of 1, but as we'll find out, the radius on the base, our xy plane there, is 2. And we can find this 2 value from our intercept. So basically, we're just going to tick across the axes. We're going to try to find a scale. Since we know that all of our axis sticks have 11 holes, I'm going to go ahead and draw 11 tick marks on each stick. And we have just the y is the blue, the x is the red, and the z is the yellow. And then for finding our intercepts, we're going to start with x, y, and z equaling to 0. So we basically just need to pick a variable to go off of. I'm going to pick x and y to equal 0 so I can figure out what the xy plane looks like. So when x and y equal to 0, we just plug that in and we just get that z equals 4. So that means that at z equals 4, we just have the start of our paraboloid, the top of the thumb shape. And then when z equals 0, we end up with 4 equals x squared plus y squared. And if you'll notice, this is actually the circle equation. So when r squared equals x squared plus y squared, that's our circle equation. And so solving from that equation, we can see that r equals 2 when z equals 0. And so that's basically the maximum we're going to get for this graph, because we're graphing on the interval from z equals 0 to 4. So that base of our graph on the tactile graph, that circle on the bottom, that purple one, is going to have a radius of 2. So I chose each tick mark on the z-axis to equal 0.5, and then each tick mark on the x and y axis is going to equal 0.2. And that just gave me like a wide enough circle that it looked nice. When graphing this in the three-dimensional option for the XYZ we have here, you can see I'm trying to draw this circle to hit each tick mark at 2 on the x and y plane. But because it's two-dimensional and we're doing a three-dimensional drawing, it just doesn't look good. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get it to look like a paraboloid by drawing circles around it. And so what I'm actually going to use here is what we call the level set method. And so if you've ever looked at maps, they sometimes have level sets. And this just basically, like if you have a mountain, you might have like a different color for the peak of the mountain versus the base of the mountain. And that's really what I'm going for here, is that I want to show each circle that I've made here with the tactile graph in a specific color, and that is the level, and that is the height. The level equals the height on the z-axis. So I'm going ahead and I'm just drawing an xy plane here, and then I'm going to create the same tick marks with the 2 the 0.2 in each increment, and then that'll just enable me to draw a more logical way to make a two-dimensional plane. And that's why people who make maps do these level sets, is because it's so hard to look at a mountain on a two-dimensional graph and see how the curvature and the shapes of these mountains look. And so these level sets give us the option to at least like imagine that we're walking uphill when it's brown, and we're going on the downhill when it's purple. So here the base, that xy plane, is purple. That's when the radius of this circle equals 2. And you can see my circle is a little off center, and that's because of a margin of error, right? I didn't make my tick marks perfectly centered, so what can you do? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to find more of these levels or these circles that we have here. Typically I'll call these coordinates, but today they're levels for each height on our z-axis of these circles. And for the paraboloid, we should expect that as the z-axis increases, the radius of the circles is going to decrease, and that's because our x and y are negative, right? So at the top, the peak of our mountain, z equals 4. We already determined that when we set x and y equal to 0. And then here I'm just going to solve for r. So using our circle equation, r squared equals x squared plus y squared, solving for r, we actually get that r equals the square root of 4 minus z. So then I'm going to choose some z values that look nice to try to find these levels. And so when z equals 1, r is going to equal the square root of 3. When z equals 2, r equals the square root of 2. And then when z equals 3, r equals 1. So I've gone ahead and put all these levels on the tactile graph. You can see that paraboloid shape kind of taking form. And then I'm just going to go ahead and mark out those circles here. So since the square root of 3 is approximately 1.7 and the square root of 2 is approximately 1.4, I'm going to go ahead and mark those on my xy plane to mark out those levels. And then on the tactile graph, I'm just basically covering my surface in these little quilting squares. And these quilting squares just made a nice moldable surface. So I thought they would work out well so we could see this in 3 dimensions. And, you know, it's not perfect. There's a couple wrinkles in my surface, right? And that's okay. We will figure that out. But so anyway, trying to identify these level sets on the xy plane, we can see that when we're at 1.7, the square root of 3, approximately, then I'm going to draw a blue circle. At square root of 2, approximately 1.4, I'm going to draw a red circle. And then when r equals 1, then I'm going to draw a lilac circle. And this just kind of correlates with the tactile graph that I made. So here's that first level for you when r equals 1. And again, it would be perfectly centered if I were a perfect artist, but what can you do? And then as far as the tactile graph goes, I'm basically just taking these quilting squares and I'm just kind of inserting them around these circles so that they make a nice paraboloid type shape. Again, this kind of looks like a thumb. It's basically it's a parabola upside down and it's spun around so that it's 3-dimensional. And so all of these level sets, when z equals 0, we're on that dark purple circle. Z equals 2, we have the red. Z equals 1, we have the blue. And then z equals 3, we have the lilac. Z equals 4, I just have this brown dot in the center to mark out that this is our top, the peak of the mountain. All right, that is the parabola. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching.